Hello on Tuesday morning, April the 5th. Just gonna throw another video out there. Mainly, I guess what I'm doing right now is just trying to get ideas out there that I've been rattling around in my own head for a while, and some of which I'm thinking about maybe in a slightly different light as I've been exposed to more thinkers about different topics in recent months than I have in the past for various reasons. With respect to why I'm seeing or reading different thinkers more now than I had in the past, and that's kind of what I want to talk about indirectly right now, just for a little bit. And the title of this one, and all of my titles are subject to, I guess, editing and hopefully going back, and if I need to, perhaps like even on this one, putting in some links to some other videos and stuff that I reference. That compromising, or the value of compromise, or compromising values. And I think that one of the things that has frustrated me, or not think, I know that one of the things that has frustrated me over the years is trying to reconcile the experience, I guess, reality of values that we are hold or are told to hold, and then life as it's actually lived in the world. Recognizing that whatever our values are, others will hold different values. We tend to associate with people who hold values closer to our own, and we tend to trust that those values that are acknowledged to be closer aligned, more closely aligned, uh, are only part of the overall value structure that we all hold. We don't sit down, I don't think we are, at least I don't, sit down and interrogate every individual I meet to make sure that every value that I hold, they hold. But there are some basic ideas that when you associate with certain groups, you expect certain values to be part of the norms of that group, that's group structure. And of course, one of the problems in a multifaceted society, pluralistic society like America, one of the problems and potentials in a situation like America is that we have so many values that often clash. And how do we resolve those differences? Right now, it appears that our effort at resolution, and this, I'm not saying it never has been before, but it certainly appears to be the case now, is to get a majority elected to positions of power so that you can pass laws and make the other side do what you want to do, make everybody else hold the values that you hold. And I think that is a missed uh, objective, or it misses the potential of a democratic society in which the ideal is to provide a context in which everybody has a chance to believe what they want to believe, to live how they want to live. I would say, and further discussion may clarify this, but at this point, I would say to the degree that it doesn't harm anyone else. Um, in that regard, particularly, there are those children and those who are deemed incapable mentally for whatever reason of behaving responsible as responsible individuals that ought to have protections built around them, but that as adults, if we're talking about adults, that we kind of agree to disagree, and the things we do, the things, choices that we make, the degree to which they don't harm others, we're free to make those choices. Now, as with everything that is said or that is thought, I would suggest that it all requires context. And so, even in making those statements, I'm sure there are situations where I would say, well, yes, this universally needs to be the norm, whether or not it appears to be harming others. But I think those cases would be relatively few, but in part because I simply don't know all that goes on. And that's one of the things that I think, particularly in today's world, we lose sight of, is that we don't know all that's going on. The life of somebody living in the Bronx is way different from the life of somebody living in the plains of, West Texas or Wyoming or wherever. And so rather than trying to legislate for the whole country based on our own particular experience and context, it seems like we need to be legislating in a way that allows maximum possible freedom in all contexts while protecting individuals in all contexts, particularly to the degree that acts in one area will impact intentionally or unintentionally individuals in another area. For example, acts that would pollute a water source when the water is actually being used in a city, maybe even hundreds of miles away. So the point I think that I'm trying to make here is that the degree to which we all have limited knowledge, the ideal in electing representatives, particularly House of Representatives, but also the Senate, to go to Washington or at the state or the local level, you can break this down at every level, is not just to ensure that our ideals are enforced on everybody. I think the better view is that we elect representatives to ensure that the best possible framework is installed or enacted so that people in different regions have as much freedom as possible to live in the context in which they find themselves. Again, inner city context is very different from living life when your nearest neighbor is 100 miles away. So the degree to which we are trying to legislate too finely, we're creating problems. And we're creating problems that filter into even how the individual in the inner city and the individual on the plains are told to act and react before they even have a chance to get to know each other and recognize that as human beings, we all have the same basic issues, same basic needs, same basic wants. Yes, there's some large variety in the wants list in particular, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs are just basic things about being human that we share. The degree to which we differ on even those basic things, it seems like there still ought to be a large degree of freedom in working that out. And I bring this up because it seems to me that as I've grown up thinking about where I'm at or how I got here, one of the emphases was on having good ideas. And, we need to be able to debate and consider all ideas. And I think we're getting away from that on all sides, right and left. In other words, I think that there ought to be room for multiple ideas to be expressed, particularly in the university setting at college campuses. But there ought to be room for all ideas to be expressed, and there ought to be room for discussion, and there ought to be opportunity for people to change their mind or not, and then still go along when the discussion is over. And yet there also ought to be a way where, say, two adults that have families can be allowed to raise their children with the ideas they think their children ought to be raised with, educating their children what they think they ought to be educated in, until such times the children become adults and are equipped, hopefully, with the skills to think clearly and logically, so that as they encounter other ideas that may or may not be new to them, they're able to decide for themselves how they want to live, how they want to pass on those ideas or not, etc. So that as we're in this period of cancel culture that appears to be taking place on both sides of the aisle, I want to, and typically when I say both sides of the aisle, I'm referring to for I guess, the sake of ease, the Republican and Democrat political divide. But the idea that any given context ought to be outlawed because it poses a threat doesn't seem to be sufficient basis for outlawing that context. And one of my points is, and again, just a few, I'm limited to what I've had time and opportunity to experience. So one of the reasons I'm doing this is to try to get more information based on your experiences, but I even only have so much time for that. But the degree to which, for example, Russian TV has either been, and I don't know if this is the whole station has been shut down or just particular contributors on that station has been shut down. And the reference I keep hearing is a 2017 DNI report, which I've downloaded, but I haven't had a chance to read, in which particular programs are argued, and in the whole RT station, Russian television station, was argued to be an anti-American propagandist tool. Part of me wants to say, well, so what? If American propagandist tools aren't sufficient to counter the arguments that are found on the Russian television station, then we need to review our arguments. Our being, American arguments. And one of the things that concerns me is that many of the voices, or at least some of the voices that I've been hearing about, are voices in America that have been consistently critical of much of what America has done in the past and in the present. And that was their only venue, Russian television. They weren't able to get an audience or a hearing, let alone an audience, on any of the other venues. The degree to which enterprises such as YouTube and Facebook and others are deciding what ideas should and shouldn't be disseminated, it seems to me ought to be concerning to everybody. Recognizing that these are all private entities, if they put themselves out there as private entities who seek to profit by giving a voice to varied perspectives, then how can you legitimately choose which perspectives are too varied to be given a voice to? So and then a couple of other things, that I'll mention here and try to look back at later with some ideas from you. The defense budget as a percent of national GDP. I've recently seen a website that puts out some charts. I need to find those and get those that linked. One of which was GDP. And I've seen some charts that show that I think America has a GDP percent of budget, or a budget amount budgeted, just a strict dollar amount budgeted. I need to clarify which it is, but that it's more than the next 10 countries combined, if I remember correctly. Why is that necessary? And the reason I raise this question is, to what degree have those, particularly Christians, but all who think that we as a nation ought to be pursuing peace, have we been pursuing an agenda that's based on and actually requires war to be justified, so that the pursuit of peace is actually made the redheaded stepchild when it comes to how we structure our priorities? And the major thing, and I'm going to close with this because I'm already going longer than I want on these. The major thing is the current Russian-Ukraine situation. It seems to me that there's evidence that this whole debacle could have been avoided had America chosen to take different steps over the last 20 plus years. Now, it may be that had we taken steps that, based on the current context, had we taken steps in the history that would have avoided this current Russia-Ukraine conflict, there would have been other issues that will spark this conflict or another conflict like it. But that doesn't seem to me to justify not taking the steps that could have been taken to keep us from going to the road that led to this. Obviously, I would even say, based on what I've been seeing and hearing and reading, but led directly to this. It wasn't like for the last 15 plus years, 20 plus years, whatever it's been, there haven't been declarations that have said, if you keep going this way, if you go this far, you've crossed a line. And yet we kept going this way and going this far, and we crossed the line. And so anyway, I'm going to stop there because I'm already over 15 minutes. And but that's what I want us to think about. How do we compromise? When we think we're compromising our values, are there really other values that we hold equally or even more dear that are being compromised in the name of not compromising some other value along the way? We'll talk more about these and other things later. If there's anything in particular that I mentioned that you want to call attention to or make me think about differently or more deeply, I appreciate that. Look forward to your comments. Thank you much. Bye-bye.